Okay, Dr. Asante, we're ready to start.
Okay. Uh, Thank you very much. I want to say good afternoon to all of you in the United States and those of you who are in other parts of the world. Good evening. I am Molefi Keti Asante, and I am the chair of the Department of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University. And from time to time, we have the most outstanding scholars in the world come and share with our graduate students mainly, but anybody who wants to be present, just their general ideas, just to have a situation where students in this department, which sees itself as a vanguard department for the discipline, really touch bases with the significant intellectuals who have made this field. And we are very fortunate this afternoon to have one of the great ones with us. And this is, in my judgment, one of the top revolutionary thinkers that we have had for the last 100 years. I'm very pleased that Dr. Wade W. Nobles, uh, uh, Ifabemi Shangadari Nana Kwaku Burko the First, Bejana Onibune has agreed to be with us. Uh, Professor Nobles is the son of Annie Mae Cotton and John Nobles. Dr. Nobles' paternal grandfather, Mims Nobles, was born into the barbarism of American slavery. His father, Wade Nobles, was also born into the savagery of slavery. Wade Nobles was the oldest son of Candace Agnes Silla, who was also born into captivity in Edgefield, South Carolina in 1810. Dr. Nobles is the namesake of Agnes' oldest son. Dr. Noble's mother and father named him Wade, which means one who is able to tread through difficult matters like mud, snow, or ignorance. Baba Dr. Wade Ifabeme Shangadari is professor emeritus in Africana Studies and Black Psychology at San Francisco State University, a founding member and executive director of the Institute for the Advanced Study of Black Family Life and Culture, Incorporated in Oakland. Dr. Noble's professional career as a teacher, researcher, academician, and scholar activist has been a consistent and formal engagement in the ongoing theoretical and programmatic development and restoration of the African mind and worldwide liberation of African people. He is the author of over 100 articles, chapters, research reports, and books, the co author of the seminal article in Black Psychology, Voodoo or IQ, an introduction to African psychology, and the author of Seeking the Saku, Foundational Writings in African Psychology, an anthology of over 30 years of African centered research and scholarship, and his newest manuscript, The Island of Memes, Haiti's Unfinished Revolution, was described by Dr. Theophile Obenga as perhaps the most important book of the last 5 decades. Dr. Nobles has lectured in Ghana, South Africa, England, Haiti, Cuba, and served as a visiting professor in Salvador da Bahia and Sao Paulo in Brazil. He was initiated into the Ifa spiritual system at Oshogbo, Nigeria in 1992, and received the high honor of being installed as the Nkwasohini development chief of Akwasiho Kwaku region of Ghana in West Africa in 1996. He and his wife, Dr. Vera L. Nobles, who got her PhD from Temple of the ABSI Pan-African Psychology Global, and have 5 children and 13 grandchildren. Dr. Nobles currently serves as the chairperson of the ABSI Pan-African Black Psychology Global Initiative, considered one of the most revolutionary thinkers of the last 100 years. Wade Nobles is a treasure to our academic endowment and certainly one of the people that all of our students should know. At this time, we're going to spend an hour with our great scholar, Dr. Wade Nobles. Your own. Dr. Nobles.
Thank you very much, Malefi. I appreciate it. I was trying to remember the last time I actually had my physical presence at Temple University. Walking across the parking lot with you, and I think it's been a long time.
Well, we hope when COVID is over, we're gonna work on that.
That'll be the reward for getting through this epidemic.
That's right.
I would ask that we don't have an hour, so I'm gonna ask if I can get the ability to share my screen. Because what I would like to do is to just run through some slides and then hopefully give a sense of where I've come from in terms of the development of Pan-African psychology. And I don't know if, I think I'm here.
You should be able to share your screen now, Dr. Nobles.
Okay, let's see if we'll, okay. Yeah, okay, very good. Well, what I want to do, if I may, I wish we had more time so I could get a sense of the students that were on in your graduate program and know what they're thinking and doing. But I thought I would use this Temple Talk to talk about this journey from Black psychology to what I'm now calling Sakuje or Shetty Tim. And I will walk you through that kind of quickly because I want to make the first point, the very first point is that there's been a hegemonic imposition of the Western grand narrative, which is rooted in white supremacy as the universal. And so all our academic training, all our thinking in the world has been tricked into believing that the Western grand narrative is universal and applies to everybody. That amounts to what we are now talking about as epistemicide, the killing of the ability to think and to know. And I want to guide the class through some perceptions of that idea. So very quickly, there are 2 people that I want to root this grand narrative in. One is George Hegel and the other is Raymond Gobineau. And these 2 philosophers, look at their time, 1700s, they contaminated the entire world's thinking about what it is to think. Hegel said that colonialism and the slave trade were preordained manifestations of God's will. So he dismisses the accountability of the European world for being evil and savagery. He goes on to say at this point, notice time, 1800s, he says, at this point we leave Africa, not to mention it again, for it is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit. What we properly understand by Africa is the unhistorical, undeveloped spirit still evolved in the conditions of mere nature or savagery, in which had to be presented here only as on the threshold of world history. He's creating an intellectual atmosphere now to suggest that there is nothing of value to interrogate anything about Africa, and that all thinkers and scholars move forward from this early on to never turn to Africa for anything. Gobineau goes on to say that human progress went from African primitivism to European civilization. So he creates this hierarchy of Africa being on the bottom and Europe being on the top, we being primitive, savage, they being civil. He says somehow, I like the way they pondered these things and almost like a lawyer setting up a trap. He says somehow there must be a substantial difference between the white and the Negroid man. The difference is the direct result of the difference in conditions in Europe and Africa. The humans in Europe therefore had to use their brains to overcome these problems, while the humans in Africa had hardly any need to use their potential skills. This is the explanation why the Negroes are still quite undeveloped, while the Caucasians have been able to use their intelligence to build an impressive civilization. So these two men have framed the discourse, framed the conversation. I'm trained as a psychologist, even though I've spent, thank God, my entire intellectual career in Africana Studies departments. But the three major people in psychology were Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and G. Stanley Hall for American psychology. And just quickly, look what they've done. They've, again, contaminated the field. Sigmund says he believed that Black people were of the three lowest forms of human beings, and he referred to his patients, showing the power differential between the therapist and the patient. He referred to his patients as his Negroes. They were lower than him. They had no power. Carl Jung says, and if I can make a what do you call it, a truth in lending kind of notion. Carl Jung was the only white psychologist I thought had any value when I was a graduate student. I now don't even give him that esteem. Carl Jung says he believed that certain psychological maladies found among Americans were due to the presence of Black people. Look at his language. He noted that the causes for the American energetic sexual repression could be found in a specific American complex, namely living together with lower races, especially Negroes. He's saying, in effect, that being around Black folks make white folks crazy, that our savagery seeps into their core. And then G. Stanley Hall is an interesting, again, I call these the three big dogs, but that's being probably too much street language for an academic discussion. But G. Stanley Hall says he theorized that Africans, Indians, and Chinese were members of the adolescent races in a stage of incomplete growth. He is famous for his recapitulation theory, where he believes the development of a human from birth to adult is the recapitulation of what civilizations go through. And he says that we Africans, but he was an equal opportunity discriminator. He said we Africans and Chinese and Asians were adolescents race, stuck in adolescence, and so we could not be responsible for ourselves. We had to have the care of Europeans. I want to make a note, and I highlighted in yellow, that G. Stanley Hall actually taught Francis Cecil Sumner, who was the first African-American to get a PhD. And he took some strange credit for Francis Sumner, but you should know, and I hope you research, your students will go and look at that. Francis Sumner spoke fluently 3 different languages. Stanley Hall spoke none. Francis Sumner actually worked his way through graduate school, translating scientific journals into German and Portuguese and French. Francis Hall couldn't do anything. Yet he wants to claim he was the teacher of this great Black person. But I need to show you this very quickly, because what I want to try to say is that when you look at the social behavioral science, particularly psychology, and look at their major players and look at the timeline of what was going on, these men never talked about in their theories the savagery, the war savagery of the European world. That they never talked about the impact of 400 years of enslavement, not just on Black folk, but on white folk. They never talked about what the ravishing of the Civil War happened in the American Constitution as thinking human beings, or the Spanish-American War, or World War II. And I go on with this, but I'm just taking a brief plea. What I want you to see is that this all began with and rooted in Hegel and in Gobineau, and rooted in what's called the Sugar Revolution, and the impact that these Africans in Haiti caused the world to have a psychiatric break. That the Haitian Revolution literally drove the entire European world insane in terms of its ability to be a fair and comparable partner to the world. This notion, I would argue, is due to this historical trauma and psychic terrorism that we can document, we can look at. This historical trauma that the children, the relatives, descendants of culture may not have personal experience with traumatic stresses, but they inherit them. We've never looked at the impact of slavery or enslavement or colonialism on the mindset and the mindscapes of African people as through an African lens. We've only said that we were damaged, we were somehow suffered. The population is historically subjected to long-term trauma exhibit higher percentage of disease and dysfunction for several generations after experiencing that trauma. Now think about this as we look at what's going on with COVID right now. This impact of COVID is going to impact generations to come if we don't address it from an African lens. And I've introduced it in Black psychology, the term psychic terrorism, where I point out that any act of thought designed to immobilize, including our ability to think, immobilize or destabilizes one's sense of security and safety by assaulting one's consciousness and identity and value. And we're struggling with this whole notion of consciousness and identity from the beginning of time with Black psychology. So the question becomes, and you see that you can count the clock in terms of how African Americans are experiencing in the Western world. But how does normal life in America reflect and reinforce, this is the question, reinforce the overt acts of racism and dehumanization? I can jump quickly to just a few months ago and ask, how did America respond to, reflect, support the savagery that was the invasion and the attempted coup d'etat in America by white folk who claimed to be patriots? How do we respond to this overwhelming violence and arbitrary killing of our people? Just today, we're in the midst of the murder that was felt around the world. And just today, we have another murder of a Black person, and there's no outrage, at least I have seen none. There's no outrage in terms of the overwhelming violence and arbitrary killings that the economic and political system allows to go on because it is disfranchised, disrespected, and disregard of Black people. allows their criminalization to be normal behavior due to this unresolved lingering effects of enslavement. And so I'm going to skip some things because I want to get our time. I want to give our time some honor. Two of Malefi and my best friends and colleagues, Jacob Carruthers and Asa Hilliard, I like to stand on their shoulders. They were our brothers in arms. Jake said that African scholar practitioners must break the chains that link African ideas to European ones and listen to the voice of the ancestors without European interpretation. He goes on to say, ultimately, knowing is the result of a divine, universal, and intergenerational conversation among God, the creator, the cosmos, nature, and the creatures of the earth, especially human beings. How do we do this intergenerational conversation with the ancestors, with God, with nature itself? That's a question that we should look at as we work through these processes and calling ourselves African-centered scholars and intellectuals. Asa Hilliard said, I had the honor and the tragedy of watching Asa in Egypt, in Kemet, walk into eternity and die at that time. But Asa says, it is time to take charge of our tools, our problem definitions, our priorities, and to change directions. It is time to reach for excellence. We must have a mission to assume greater responsibility and control over our children's socialization. Education is socialization, and to push for education as critical consciousness. So it seems to me that several years ago, back in 1978, I had suggested while I was at San Francisco State that Black studies should be compelled to explore in the complete contours, the context, the content, the conditions of the African notion of being human, the African notion of human essence. Black studies scholars should be able to construct investigations that examine and test the utility of African people's creative response to their conditions and our resolute position in the world from the vantage point of an African spirit. And I believe that's been the nature of my work as I've tried to unfold that charge. And it's been basically a battle between these two grand narratives. All we're taught in the American Academy is the Western grand narrative. You see that on your screen in terms of what it speaks to being what's real, reality, is knowing framework, is intellectual mindscape. I have offered, and I suggested that we should propose a African grand narrative. There's no reason why we have to always react to their grand narrative. We can propose how we understand the world, and I believe it's based in a deeper digging, a deeper delving into Kemet, Nubian, Bantu, Congo thought. And in that grand narrative, I suggest that what is real is both the visible and the invisible world. The notion of consubstantiation, of person, of synergy, that our knowing framework is found in our mythos and our Genesis myths and our meaning of being human. And our intellectual mindscape has to have components that reflect or respond to commonality, transformations, transcendence, improvisation, agency. That's really what my read of the whole African-centered movement that was gifted to the world by Molefi Asante was the question of agency and the centrality of our thinking. And so I've laid this out in my own mind as a reminder that there is a contestation of grand narratives in our work. And if we don't be careful, we will default into the Western grand narrative when we haven't used the African grand narrative to guide our work. And that narrative really is what reflects, the narrative is really what reflects how one knows and thinks and recognizes and records events and experiences. So you can take any action and it's your narrative that dictates how you recognize it to be an action worth looking at or be recorded. And it's the narrative that makes sense out of reality. It shapes and influences what we see and accept as normal. This pathology, this white supremacy as a mental illness can only be seen through an African grand narrative. But in the Western grand narrative, you may just say, well, there's some bad white people, and we should understand that they're bad. And we can prove to them that we're worthy to live, that we can prove to them that as we're running away from them, they should not shoot us in the back, prove to them that we're worthy of not having to being able to sleep in our cars and not be shot to death in our front seat. That's the narrative is what tells you those actions are normal. The voice is another important concept. I think voice and narrative go hand in hand. Voice is the power to express one's essence in the experience of living. Voice is used to capture the maps of meaning growing out of a people's cultural grounding, historical relationships, and meaning of the person. Those are like three wells we should be drinking from: our cultural grounding, our historical relationship, and our meaning of person. And in those things, they are found in us taking the time to reflect deeply about what is the episteme that guides what we do, to think deeply of being comfortable with having a paradigmatic framework that shifts the paradigm so we think and see and smell and taste and hear through African genes. And finally, what do we do in the world? And so I'm gonna skip this, but I want to point out that I think what we have an opportunity to do now is to Africanize the new normal. All people, everyone in the world is talking about that we have to have a new normal coming out of COVID. And we have said, and I think others, is not just us, but many have said, we don't have just the COVID-19 pandemic, we have the COVID-19 married to the white supremacy 19 pandemic. White supremacy 19 being that in 1619, when they first started to kidnap us, they started with the breathing white supremacy into our souls. And so there's a dual pandemic that we're struggling with. And we should be thinking, we who are intellectuals and scholars and academicians should be thinking, how do we now take this opportunity to Africanize the new normal? And I think the fundamental and essential question is, can we be African? Not Black Americans, not Negroes, not coloreds, not Bilalians. Can we be African in a pathogenic, hostile, and anti-African society? Can we have community engagement and development in a decolonizing and re-Africanizing university? And literally, in my estimation, Temple University and FAMU have the two places that have stood up and attempted to have a re-Africanizing university for our students. I think the answer for me, and I don't think it is for me, is yes. The real issue for us is to be African or not to be. That's another statement by Asa Hilliard. That our fundamental question is to be African or not to be. To not be African philosophically, culturally, spiritually, aesthetically, and psychologically in a society of African negation and nullification can only result in our collectively not being. In such a space, all that we can be is the deviant form of them or nothing. The psychological liberation of the African mind and the worldwide development of African people requires that we as a people take responsibility for defining, maintaining, in controlling every institution that influences and impacts on the agency of African people. So all your students will left here going through your program and are graduating with the honor and the gift of having been worked and trained by you, leave out your door, taking responsibility for defining, maintaining, controlling whatever institution they find themselves in, including their own families, because your family is the first institution that you have to make sure that is healthy and viable. And so I think that we could begin by saying, first of all, that we are our ancestors. You know, we let their rituals and their narrative say, well, ancestors is something that we take a picture and put a picture on the wall. And in the United States, all the white folks' ancestors in the White House, the big statues, they worship their ancestors, but they worship their ancestors as some great people have gone before. For the African, we are the continuation of our ancestors. In fact, we are come back to complete what our ancestors did not complete. So we have a long, ongoing struggle. Again, we have to, again, my thinking is that, this is my thinking I'm sharing with you, and John Henry Clark, the most, in my mind, the most important historian in the world, used to say that I will teach you something. If it's of value, take it and make it better. If it's of no value, throw it into the ash can of history. And so I'm gonna invite your students to take what I'm sharing. If it is of value, take it and make it better. If it's not value, don't say, well, that's Molefi's friend. Molefi said he's an intellectual scholar. I got to memorize it. No, if it's not value, throw it in the ash can of history. I think that if we look at the question of languaging, of voice, of narrative, and this now proposing this African Kemet Nubian Pan-Du Congo narrative, we can begin to see the same way our ancestors saw as they walked in the Nile. So reality becomes important to unpack. Reality for the African deep thought, as I have been taught, is that the universe is matter in appearance, in spirit, and reality. Reality is non-localized, immutable, and eternal spirit. The material universe is only the perception of reality. African epistemology imprints the natural centrality of the role of the divine, and don't knee-jerk into religion when I say divine, role of the divine and of the spirit in the acquisition of knowledge. What's the role of spirit in acquisition of knowledge? We have argued, for people that I talk to a lot, that we are not human beings, that we are spirit beings, that we are not human. We are spirit, living energy, vital force. We are spirit beings housed in a physical container having a human experience. If that is true, and I believe it is, then that shapes how we walk in the world of thinking. That shapes how we walk in the world of building institutions. That shapes how we walk in the world of how do we free ourselves from the bondage of European thought. These realms of reality are important to look at. We only look at the visible realm, what's called the microcosm in the world, but the full reality is also the invisible realm, what's called the mesocosmos, which is the intermediate world of spirits and genies and benevolent and malevolent forces, and the macrocosmos, which is the world of the divine, the answers of spirit. When do we have an intellectual, this may sound like a strange question, but when do we have an intellectual conversation to guide our reach, talking with the dwellers of heaven, the ancestors, the spirit beings? And let me go back to this, because I think I want to, maybe I can go back, let's see. Well, I can't go back, so I'll go forward. The idea of language is important. I think we should spend some time rescuing terminology from our original traditional African languages. And that doesn't mean to say, well, I'm a psychologist, so I got a word called schizophrenia. How do you translate that into Yoruba? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about just taking our words and translate them into African languages. I'm talking about look at what words in African languages represented the kinds of functioning or dysfunctioning that we see as important to examine. One of those words is Zola. And Zola is a Congo word that really translates to love. But what it really means is that love is the magnetic energy that activates one's self-healing potential. If you just hold that for a moment, that Zola, love, is the energy that activates our self-healing potential. Then go back to Big Mama's house and look what Big Mama, Grandmama, and Madea and Mud did when someone got sick. they begin to surround that person with love, even to the point of making some sort of soup and speaking into the soup, love thoughts to energize what's called Ngolo, the healing energy. You see, so what I've done now is I've started dipping my toe into the well of African deep thought to get some technology that we might be able to use. Zola is better understood as energy that causes the activation of molecular and cellular regeneration. We could stop right there and say, let's take this to the African-oriented physicists and ask them, you all been playing around with this stuff called quantum physics and qualar and issues. How does this work in the realm of physics? The activation of the molecular and cellular regeneration of both the material and immaterial levels of reality. It is akin to a vibrating and radiating force. I flash back to when I was a child and someone got sick. Old people would come with soup and stuff, and they would go in the room and they would hum and they'd be rocking. And as a child being ignorant, I said, oh, they're gonna kill them. They're up there rocking. What the more folks doing? But their rocking was literally establishing a rhythmic pattern in the room of energy vibration that was activating their radiating forces that activated the molecular structure for regenerating health. So I hope you can see that just playing with this one idea, one concept, we can begin to talk about a different way of walking in the world. Zola should be an essential, in my mind, should be an essential feature for community engagement, for decolonization, for Africanizing both the university experience, but our everyday walk around experience. Okay. And so, the other thing I wanted to point out, I'm moving to my end, is that did you all know, I hope some of you know, that there's something called the stilt walkers, and their proper name is Moko Jumbi. The stilt walkers. The stilt walkers in actuality were spirit beings. They always were dressed in with a mask, generally a mask that was ash painted to reflect the drawing in of ancestral energy. But the stilt walkers were structured so that they stood on these tall legs. But there wasn't just for aesthetic purposes for people to see, to be impressed with their ability to balance themselves on these sticks. The stilt walkers was raised up high, so they could foresee evil coming. So they could foresee what medicine needs to be retrieved in order to keep the village protected and well. So I'm now repurposing the stilt walkers not as a game of entertainment, but as an icon that represents some things we need to do. For one, you look at this, take one leg of the stilt walker. I'm saying that leg should be the affirmation of African beingness. There are two things I believe we should do. One is affirm our African beingness, and two is decolonize our mind. So I'm using the Moko Jumbi, I'm calling it the Moko Jumbi dance, use the Moko Jumbi to do that. One leg is to affirm African beingness. To reclaim African affirmation of being, we must accept the fundamental different meaning of being human and continually address some important things. One thing is understanding what being a spirit means. And I've coined that the divine energy made manifest. We are spirit energy, we are made physically manifest. So I said that is divine energy made manifest. And if you take those letters, D-E-M-M, DEM, it is what our ancestors were giving us a hint to a long time ago. They said, wait, you go over there and tell them people to be quiet. You go and get them some help. You go do this and this. They weren't mispronouncing them. They were leaving us a footprint, an auditorial footprint of who we are. We are DEM. We are divine energy made manifest. And so it's important that we, in order to affirm our African beingness, that we understand what it means to be DEM. We engage in both visible and invisible realms of reality. We honor, and I highlight this as a larger task, honor the feminine as primary and paramount. We enhance our understanding of the sacred meaning of being human. We always advance our human potential and unlimited possibility. Think about just what, advance our human potential and unlimited possibility. If I am a businessman and I start a business, my business should be driven with that goal of advancing human potential and unlimited possibility of my people. We have to create systems of cultural maturation and spiritual evolution. We must defend the right and responsibility to walk in the world as a unique and valuable human being with an African face. Finally, we must minimize our personal trauma and our shattered consciousness some which is at our own hands. We create trauma and pain to ourselves and maximize the egalitarian lifestyle of proper nutrition. We need to say that eating right is something that only hippies do, or thinking about ecology and loving the trees, only what white folks do. No, we need to know about and understand proper nutrition, exercise, ecology, spiritual evolution. And then the second leg of the Moko Jumbi dance is the decolonization of the African mind. This task of freeing our minds can be thought of as scaffolding a layers of mental experience. One layer, dismantle the edifice of Western hegemony. You have to do that intentionally, because you just don't do it intentionally. You always default back into thinking with the European Western model. We have to dismantle the edifice of Western hegemony. We have to deconstruct the implicit privileging we give to white thought. And we don't do that intentionally. We default back into giving white thought special position. We have to disrobe the false image of the white aesthetic. Disrobe it, take its mask off. The white aesthetic, everything that is beautiful is not white. We need to take pride in our big lips, thick lips, flat nose, kinky hair, buck eyes, all the stuff that they try to make us think is denigration. We should take that back and beautify it as the standard that only God could create. With the challenge and correct the singularity of this materialistic ontology with linear polarities of white at the top, black at the bottom, male at the top, female at the bottom, right, wrong, young, old, all these dichotomies. We have to challenge and correct those. And then engage in the identification and elimination of dehumanizing systems. And we got a bunch of them. Institutional oppression, place, know your place, boy, classism, disenfranchisement, Western educational pedagogy, Fanon's thingification, menticide, Bobby Wright, aristocracy, denigration, sexism, colorism, elitism, racism, class privileges, chattel enslavement, individualism, caste, episcopicide. Even the question of nation state imposition has to be questioned and challenged if we are to decolonize the African mind. And so I'm proposing these as issues that we have to do. Remember I said the idea of the feminine being primary and paramount. When I look at what our ancestors taught us, they said that with increasing years of longevity, one's status and value in the community rises. That's why eldership is held with honor, not just getting old. Living to be a very old age is considered a blessing. It is thought to be an honor to be in the presence of an elder. It's thought to be an honor just to be in the presence of an elder. The African narrative holds that up in high regard. The European narrative says you got to be young, bright. Young and bright is the valuable one. In fact, to have elders live with you and for you to have available their daily guidance is considered a great blessing and advantage. So go home and think about how you live. When's the last time you talked to old folks? Think about that. But what our ancestors taught us is that 2 terms now, not just being old, but being Baba Agba or being Iya Agba. When men enter the community of elders, they take on the role of Baba Agba, which means a senior father, or more correctly, a nurturing father. How do we got this silly dichotomy that women nurture and men are the breadwinners. No, as an elder, as a Baba Agba, my job is to nurture life, to nurture the young as a nurturing father. When women enter the community of elders, they take on the role of Iya Agba, which means a senior mother or a warrior mother. It is the Iya Agba who have the primary role as the spiritual protector of the community. And we can now examine how we did all our stuff, all our civil rights movements, even though they had men up front, it was the presence of the women, the warrior women in those movements that were designed to serve the role of spiritual protector. With the status of eldership, women are devoted to protecting and defending warrior women, the spiritual balance of community. Men are dedicated to securing and establishing, nurturing fathers, the spiritual harmony of the community. So we can take just one slide now and say, let's go rethink how we deal with family counseling, with marital counseling, with this whole issue of gender equity, et cetera, and recast it and rethink it. And so I want to sort of come to, I hope we still have some time, come to the point of, I suggest that we walk in the world as dim. whether we be scholar or bus driver. We walk in the world as them, as divine energy made manifest. We accelerate our African spiritual growth. And that is done with what I'm calling a divine alignment, the alignment of our essence, our expression, and our experience. The essence, the essentiality of being spirit. That doesn't mean I'm going to be, I get better privilege because I have lighter complexion than you. Therefore, I think light-skinned Black folks are better than dark-skinned Black folks. All that stuff goes out the window. The essence, the essentiality of being spiritness, expression, presenting oneself in your authentic form. We don't got to do any cosmetic whatsoever. We have to present ourselves in our authentic form and experience, living life that is vital and inspirational. So those three things, those three E's, so Lou Kuka, essence, expression, experience. Maybe some hip hop rap singers could write a rap song called Essence, Expression, Experience and put a rhyme to that so we can begin to be reminded that we are spirit beings, that our expression has to be authentic. And this may be revealing myself as a old crotchety man, but I don't think wearing your pants down below your behind is an expression of your authenticity. How you adorn yourself, how you dress, how you walk in the world should all be aligned to what? To be dim, divine energy made manifest. And then experience living life that's vital and inspirational. This struggle that our young people are going through and that we went through during the civil rights movement and marching and struggling and petitioning and protesting, all that was in response to what you've given us, what you've created for us is not vital. It is not inspirational. So we want to change the game. We want to change the way we live in the world. And that protest is about what? Making an experience for Black people. And quiet is kept. When you make it good for Black people, all people benefit from it. But make an experience of Black people that is living life as vital and inspirational. That just walking in the room and seeing your teacher being Molefi Kete Asante inspires you. Walking in the room or walking home, coming home, and you see your husband or your wife or your children, just the seeing of them inspires you because the experience of family is inspirational and not dysfunctional. So the refinement of this new normal, and I think we should be talking about new normal. We should use that language. What's going to be our new normal? I believe that our new normal is the old African reality. We got to rescue it, struggle with it, clean it up, modify it, make it contemporary. Our new normal should be the old African reality. That's my opinion. You think that makes sense? Take it and make it better. If you don't think it's throw it in the ash can of history. It is within the process of those things I just gave, the process of Zola, Moko Jumbi, languaging, voice, narrative, that we rescue, adopt, and utilize an African new normal. The internalization and performance of the Moko Jumbi dance, and hopefully all your students, Molefi, will leave out of temple doing the Moko Jumbi dance. The internalization of the performance of the Moko Jumbi dance alone will signal the simultaneous guide for African continual movement toward a greater capacity of Black people in the world to be African and to be excellent. It is through this refinement that will allow us to be African, to be family, to be awesome. Fanon says, the European experiment succeeded so well that the United States of America became a monster in which the taints, the sickness, and inhumanity of Europe had grown to appalling dimensions. I'm saying we are at our last chance. We must continue our long and mighty walk in the sun with a different narrative of being human. The worldwide African revolution to humanize the world is yet to be finished, and the ancestors required that we finish the job. The unfinished revolution is to be African, to be family, to be awesome. Thank you very much.
Wow. I want to, I don't know whether you can see here, but Professor Nobles, that was brilliant. And in fact, I just want to say, Jasmine, are you still here? Okay.
I want to get back to it.
Well, we want to see if we could take a few questions. Professor Nobles Actually, Nana Burko, we are so thankful to you because what you laid out for us today, you are the model of it. Divine alignment being made manifest, and our students, I'm sure, are very, very pleased. And Jasmine, you can open it up to anyone who may want to ask him a question. I even see that. We got people. We got we all got all kinds of people here. Runette Diggs. Wow, one of my old colleagues from communication field is in the house. So
I'm
so
glad to
many
hear that.
people in the house.
Let me know who I'm talking with.
Yes, yes. So all right, go right ahead, Jasmine.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Nobles, for your lecture. I can speak on behalf of the students. It was amazing. It's just an honor to be able to sit here and listen to you, especially being a student of your work. Just for everyone who is listening in, if you do have a question, please use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. And we can go ahead and get started. So our first question is from Corey Muhammad. It says, peace, Dr. Nobles. I wanted to know how we can be able to pick out and be on guard for white Eurocentric philosophies, such as postmodernism being cloaked as African/Black/African-centered philosophy, such as intersectionality, when these philosophies are being labeled as Africology or African-centered.
Yeah, I think that it's for me, it's sort of an easy answer, which probably means that I'm giving you an incorrect answer. But everything is is European. Everything, every thought that we create, if we don't intentionally break away from that narrative, and it has to be an intentional act, then what we receive is going to be steeped in the European narrative, the Greco-Roman thought. One thing you can do is you can draw a line between that thinking and its root. Its root is found somewhere in, again, Greco-Roman, Judeo-Christian thinking. And so then the question would be, what line can I draw to the African narrative, which I'm labeling the Kemet, Nubian, Bantu, Congo thought. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't align with our thinking, that's your answer. Mm-hmm. No matter how much, because what the trick that happens a lot is that the Western grand narrative regurgitates itself like a snake having a new skin. And they say the new skin is, we're different now. No, you're still the same old snake. Because you got a different skin, you still, so they trick us, particularly when we're in our student level. We have a new idea, we run to that. Well, that's the newest thought. Oh, I got to get that, I got to learn that. That's the newest thought. No, that's the new skin in the old snake. Track it down, do the work, do the intellectual mining, digging to determine how does it align itself with African deep thought. That means we got to do some work. You know, we don't have a good book that we can go to and say, here's the philosophy of Africa. We got a lot of African thought in our mythology, in our storytelling, in our narrative. Some of that has to be cleaned up because it was captured by missionaries and anthropologists, and so they contaminate it as well. But you can clean the doo-doo off of their stuff and see the richness there. That means you got to do the work. You got to do the work. And so then if you do the work, you're able to protect yourself. I think it has to be reminded with being intentional about finding the African essence of it and being intentional of not defaulting into the Western grand narrative. That default is everywhere. It's like being on ice. It's everywhere. Everything. You go to the grocery store, and the way they lay out the foods and stuff is designed from an Western grand narrative. You go to schools in the rows and columns and teach them front. All this, the architectural structure of reality has been shaped by contaminated Eurocentric thought. So you got to do two. You can be intentional about it. You can't be lazy. You got to do the work. You got to do the work. You got to be able to, they say, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Well, depending upon who the baby is. But the fact of the matter is that you do got to do something. You can take old grandmama's scrub board, take the old scrub board and scrub that thought, scrub out, get all the dirty European ideas out of it and see if there's anything African left in it. If there's no African left in it, throw it out.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you. Our next question comes from actually a graduate student in our department, Lateef Davis, says, "Hello, Dr. Nobles. I was wondering how Afrocentricity addresses the gun violence that is commonly found in the inner city. Do you think gun violence is an adaptation of an aspect of Western culture? Also, how does that relate to the spiritual realm?"
I'm really glad to hear a graduate student of Temple's program speaking to me, because as my nephew mentioned, my wife, who is my teacher, was a graduate of Temple University's graduate program. So that means this person must be somebody get some thought behind it. But you see, I think the gun violence almost could be explained simply. We're taught to hate ourselves. We've been taught to hate Blackness. And so the response to Blackness is to denigrate it or destroy it. And then we act out of that thought stream. The violence we see in our communities because we're taught to hate Blackness, and then we're taught that our organization is to organize in gang violence. And we have no awe. You can think about that. The young children, I thought it was recently, young children walk our streets. This is that psychic terrorism that I mentioned earlier in my slide. Our young children walk in the street and see a brother who's been killed, maybe by a police officer, maybe by another Black person, laying on the ground for hours, for days. And that internalizes the thought that there is no value in Black life particularly. And so then now I will act out. This is something called, in my most recent book called The Island of Memes, I use the term memes to represent this informational structure that are ideas that are embedded in our consciousness, mimetic ideas or mimetic ideations. And so we have these mimetic ideas that are embedded in our consciousness that say Blackness is of no value or it is to be feared. And so then we act accordingly because your idea is the substance of your behavior. Ideas are the substance of your behavior. An idea, niggas ain't shit. That's an idea. An idea, but it translates to behavior that says, I will get in my car and drive out of the Black community to the white community to buy ice because I believe white ice is colder than Black ice. You see how the idea influences your behavior. So if we are taught to hate and to fear Blackness, then our most response is to denigrate it or to destroy it. And then as a simple act to flood our communities with drugs, which alters our consciousness, and with guns that allow us to do all the destructive things we see in our communities. Again, that's sort of the Moko Jumbi dance. We're gonna decolonize our mind and affirm African being.
Beautiful.
Thank you. We have another question from Ms. Runette Diggs, who says, will the webinar participants have access to Dr. Noble's presentation notes? She also wanted to comment to say, wonderful presentation. I was introduced to Asante's Afrocentricity and also referenced Dr. Noble's work in my 1994 doctoral dissertation of African-American parental family communication influence on Black adolescent self-esteem. I continue to embrace an Afrocentric perspective in my work.
I'm glad to hear that. And I hope I've added you more ammunition. We need to keep creating weapons, creating ideas. Thought is a weapon. So if we create the right thoughts, then we can be victorious.
Absolutely.
And this what do you call it? A webinar. This is totally up to Dr. Asante. He does, but he is my brother, and so as my brother, I don't. If your brother is your barber, you don't need to have a mirror. And Leffy is my brother, so whatever he does with it, I'm on the court with it.
May I see what we're doing with it right now? It is on YouTube. It will be live on YouTube. And Jasmine, I'm going to ask Jasmine if she's recording. I think she is.
I am.
And we can keep it. Yes. All right.
Absolutely.
But I just want to. We have time for maybe one more comment. Jasmine, is there anybody else? Are we finished?
There is, we do have a couple more questions, but I'll just go ahead and choose one. This
Okay.
one is from Jordan Adams. It says, "Hi, Dr. Nobles. I am curious to know how we can avoid centering whiteness in our scholarly work when we seek to identify/resolve issues in our community when so much of it is rooted and created by white supremacy." She is also they are a grad student in communications from the University of Cincinnati.
Yeah, we cannot do our work and speak nothing about white folks. We're going to speak, it's like you're doing an autopsy. So if your work is an autopsy, so you have to show where the damage is. And then the prescription is how do you correct it? So the presence of white thought in our work should be that aspect of the autopsy that shows the source of the ailment. Call them out.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Dr. Sante, we just got one more question in, and it's
Okay,
actually
go
a
right
pretty
ahead.
good
Yes,
question. Do we
please.
have time
All
for
right.
one more?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. This comes from Octavia Clarkson, another graduate student here in our department. She says, "Hello, Dr. Nobles. Thank you for your presentation and great examples for understanding. What advice would you give to a graduate student who has many thoughts around so many issues like this in the world? How do we find our focus?"
Okay, that's an important question. You're a graduate student, so right now find that idea that's going to take you through this graduate process. When you're an intellectual, you have ideas all around you, and when you have, and that's a different position to be in. As a graduate student, find that idea that you want to carry you through termination of your graduate experience. Hopefully, that idea will be the platform for you to continue in your intellectual work. But in your intellectual work, there are going to be all kinds of ideas and thoughts and intrusions. And at that point, that's when you need to have colleagues. You need to have folk that you talk to regularly. I believe that if I have contributed anything to this intellectual war that we're engaging in, is because I had friends called Molefi Asante, Asa Head, Jay Carruthers, Kobe Cambone, Leonard James Myers, Naim Akbar. You have friends. I don't want to call them colleagues. You have a core set of friends, of family that you can bounce ideas off of. So that because they have love for Black people, you can bounce a crazy idea off of them, and they can tell you that's crazy and don't break your spirit. You can say, they can tell you, man, that is the stupidest shit I've ever heard. And you don't go away saying, I got an enemy. I got an enemy. No. We got to be able to have dialogue with each other. You got to appreciate and love each other.
That's right.
That's what you do. But as a graduate student, get out. Graduate student, get done. As an intellectual, gather around you those like-minded colleagues that can critique you, that can help you understand what you need to do.
That's right. Well said and well done. And Jasmine, thank you so much. This, all I can say is that this was so profoundly provocative for me. Abba of the deepest kind, because he gives us these memes, these new ideas, these points of view that we can use and we can develop and we can thrive on them. And I'm just honored today that he's taken his time to come and share with us. We will have many more occasions in which we will have him to work with our department and with our students. Right now, we are in the midst, I should say, I make this announcement, we're in the midst of hiring 4 people to our department. And we are also in the midst of developing what they're calling a Center for Anti-Racist Research, and we have been given $3,500,000 to create the institute, but we have been given 4 important positions to augment our department because our students have demanded that the university step up and that we do more. And so we're not finished. We still got more to do.
That's right.
we're not
I'm really glad
not
to hear that,
finished.
but Leffie, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Glad to hear that. And
Yeah.
I plan to see if you want to have a distance endowed chair.
Yes.
I can
Yeah,
give you,
we
I'll give you a candidate.
yeah, well,
Distance.
we look, no, we're looking for that kind of money because that would be great. I mean, and you know this, and I believe you know it. At least we love you very much. You are you're very humble because you are certainly, I mean, in the top ranks of our philosophical thinkers. And people, we talk about the ancestors, but we are our ancestors.
Absolutely.
I mean, we talk about, when I was in school, we all carried around the wretched. We carried around the wretched in our pocket. France Fanon, we had it with us. But the point of the matter is that Wade Nobles is for me just as brilliant as France Fanon. And so we need to remember that living among us are people just like France Fanon and just like the great giants, Anna Julia Cooper, and all the people that we mentioned. They're living today. We are them. So Ashe, thank you very much, and thank all of you for being here. And certainly, I was happy to note that you got people even from the UK here today, Dr. Nobles, and you did a fantastic job.
It's our world. It's our world to shape. So I'm glad.
Yes, it is.
The entire world is ours to shape.
Absolutely. Okay, Ashe, Medaisi, Pa.